When I started back, and it was in 1968, the 45th anniversary will be on the 10th of June. It was so different world in terms of the separation between writers and broadcasting. The word media barely existed. It was press, and press meant printed press, period. The other aspect of it was very minor. Local TV stations didn't really spend a lot of time covering their teams other than on the night of a game. They didn't go to practice. They didn't cover anything. They just reported on games, and they didn't have investigation of any sort. It was very, very modest. Nationally speaking, there was coverage of games, of course, such as it was, much less than anything that we know today. But there was scant investigative stuff. Probably the first really important show that did that was the Howard Cosell ABC Sports Beat Show, which everyone praised and no one watched, which one of those kind of deals. It's true. This happens. It's like certain publications that get praised and they don't get read. There was a very, very different world. And I can remember the great godfather of print then in baseball writing and really in all of sports writing was Dick Young. Dick Young of the New York Daily News. Dick Young, who changed the concept of how to go cover a game more than anybody ever did, because he was the first guy that regularly went down back in the 40s into the locker room after a game. Back in the old days, the Grantland Rice days, for example, so-called, you watched the game, you wrote about it. And then the next day you might have had a conversation with the manager or player about something that happened, but that's not the way you did it. Dick Young went down and started it. Well, anyway, I can well remember Dick Young railing about TV cameras, railing about people. He hated Howard Cosell the most. He called him Howie the Shill, and that was his pet nickname. Anyway, that was the climate I walked into in 1968, and it stayed that way for at least another 10 years or more. Bob is so correct. My colleague at the Boston Globe, Will McDonough, had so many tentacles. He was so well known among particularly the NFL, but not just the NFL. And he was a guy that just made friends. He was a guy that people warmed up to. He was a guy that jocks warmed up to, owners warmed up to, GMs, and other people in walks of sports. And so came to pass that Terry O'Neill, Emmy-winning producer, and I can't even remember whether it was when he was at CBS or NBC, which one came first, where he conceived of this idea of bringing this writer, this full-time working writer who covered the NFL, Will McDonough, and making him part of their Sunday coverage of pregame shows, in a pregame show, as the insider. He was going to provide inside information that was not available to the viewer in any other form, and it was going to be a pioneering thing. Hence, today, the Morts and the Sheffys and everybody in every other sport, they all flow from the original pioneer was Will McDonough, and the original guy who thought of the idea and made it happen was Terry O'Neill. It all started then. And that's how you have everybody doing this stuff. Now, Willie didn't stop writing for the Globe. Interesting we're talking about ethics. Because Willie played by his own rules, and there'll never be another guy like him, I can tell you, and I'm going to stop very quickly here, but just to say that the great question arose, that people said, okay, if he comes up with a scoop on Saturday night, does he save it does he give it to the Globe, or does he save it for NBC the next day? And that's a question that was a fair question, and Willie always felt whatever he felt like doing was the right answer. That was Willie. And he got away with it. And he did. And I mean, that's as much as I can, really, as far as Willie played by his own rules. But it's kind of essential to what we're talking about here tonight. But that's where it all got started.
And we're all now in this soup together, writers, broadcasters, bloggers, new media. And I wonder what the old-time greats would say tonight to us about how we handled Manti Te'o. For those of us on the panel who are in college towns, Kirk, obviously, and Mary Jo, give us your thoughts on, just from your professional status as a writer, as a broadcaster, looking back, how you thought that was handled and what could we have done better? Mary Jo?
I think that story is one of those where it ceased to be just sports news and it turned into more entertainment, television, and TMZ kind of stuff, if you will. That's what it seemed like to me. And I remember getting home from work when Jeremy Schaap had sat down with Manti Te'o, waiting to hear what he was going to tell us. And it was, midnight Eastern time, something like that, after Jeremy Schaap had talked with him. So, I mean, I was on the edge of my seat just like everybody else. Then after a while, you just I kind of got tired of it. I don't, it's so hard to tell in local TV, you know, I'm in a very localized spot. So I don't know how I would have covered that story any differently. Probably I would have never had the chance to talk to Manti Te'o because I'm at a local affiliate, and that's not the person that you typically choose to talk to if you only have one interview to give or 2 interviews to give. It's going to be Katie Couric and Jeremy Schaap. So I've never really covered a story like that, so I don't know how it would have been different. I know that sitting in, you know, on my couch the night that Jeremy Schaap had talked to him, I felt slighted because I wanted to see Manti Te'o and hear Manti Te'o at that point, and not just hear what Jeremy Schaap had heard. But I don't know that he could have done anything else at that point. That was, you know, the agreement that was made. But I think, you know, I would have liked to have seen and heard from Manti Te'o at that point. But I don't know how I would have done it any differently. I'm not sure.
I don't know. To me, it was probably the story, I guess, of the year, that with Penn State. And to me, there couldn't be 2 bigger stories at either end of the extreme. Penn State was, you know, one of the most important stories probably of all of our lifetimes, what went on there. And Manti Te'o's story is at the other end. It's like, it's half news, it's half entertainment. Sometimes it seems like it's all entertainment. And it's kind of a microcosm of everything about our business now. How everything, the lines are blurred, what's news, what's not news, how much privacy somebody's supposed to have, how much we're supposed to delve in, what is our job, what is the public's right to know, do you have the right to know anything like that? I mean, you know, if this had happened 20 years ago, you know, nobody had ever heard about it. You know, maybe it's happened 20 times and nobody ever heard of it. But I don't know, I guess more than anything, it probably saddened me a little bit just because, you know, it was kind of like watching a car wreck. It was so painful to watch, but by the same token, we were all fascinated, you know, and I still wondered, you know, I guess the most enduring question I had was this girlfriend was the love of your life, and you never met her, and you never sent her a card, you never went to the hospital when she was in a coma, you never went to the funeral, you never met her parents, you know, if this is his soulmate, I hate to think of what the next one's going to be like, you know. Maybe they'll get flowers on their 60th anniversary or something, but I guess more than anything, I just kind of felt it disturbing, you know. It's like you couldn't help but watch, and I guess because I still don't think they've been all that forthcoming, you know, and I think there was a lot of cover-up about when Manti knew and when did Notre Dame know, obviously well in advance of the game, and what effect that had on the game, his teammates. And I'm really surprised there aren't 20 fake Manti Te'o books out. There's not a book out, is there? I mean, it's kind of incredulous that there's not a book out yet. So anyway, I guess more than anything, it just kind of bothered me. And as far as, and even now, you know, Manti Te'o's trying to get on with his life with the San Diego Chargers, and you hear reports that Chargers are kind of, you know, coddling him and shielding from the media. And to me, I wish he'd just hit it head on. Here's the press conference. I'll be here all day long. Ask me every question you want to ask, and then we're going to go on to the next car wreck. You know, he had his 15 minutes, and it seemed more like about 1,500 minutes. But it does show you the fascination we have, and we want to know everything about every one of our heroes. And one, I'm not sure we have the right to know, and two, I think it gets so far away from sports as well.
Ken, give us the news director's take on Manti or Penn State. How do you think that we as a business did covering those 2 stories?
I think we did well. I know we tackled both topics pretty heavy in Charlotte, and you'd ask, why would we do that? Well, we editorially felt that the Manti Te'o situation opened up once he went on Sports Illustrated. And, you know, in essence, the Sports Illustrated story sort of got undone by what came out about the faux girlfriend. The Penn State story we rode with really hard. We examined the coaching situations, the qualifications for coaching. We looked at that as more of a solutions issue, and I'm embarrassed, I cannot remember the numbers right now, but I believe there's more than 8,000 Penn State grads living in Mecklenburg County where Charlotte is. So we tackled that a lot harder. And in total disclosure, one of our main anchors is a Penn State grad, so she wrote it really hard as well because she didn't want anybody to ever accuse her of being soft on that. But the other part of that was, and this is sort of the catch-22, we did not have a sports person do a story on either one of those topics. And that I always find amazing, that it's like, you're a sports person, these could easily be under the auspices of a sports story, but we did not have a sports person do either one of those stories.
Rick, you're the lawyer to represent us here. Obviously, there's a lot of legal issues around the Penn State story, particularly as it applies to the reporters on the scene. Let me ask you this. If a reporter were to witness some criminal activity and gains information in that reporting, is there an obligation to report that to law enforcement?
Well, the obligation to report it legally can vary from state to state, depending on the various state laws. I think in North Carolina, it's probably pretty similar to most other states, that you do not have a legal obligation to report a crime that you know about unless it involves suspected child abuse or elder abuse. And now, currently, if you don't report that, if you know of child abuse or elder abuse and you don't report it, it's not a crime in North Carolina that you can be charged with for failure to report. Starting December 1st, failure to report child abuse in North Carolina will be a Class 1 misdemeanor. But then, that's the legal aspect of it. But then you have to consider the ethical side of it is, say you gain information that someone has committed a crime, or then you have to think, well, do I report this? Because it has all sorts of implications, because it can affect the person you're reporting. You have to consider the impact on the victim, if there is a victim. You have to consider the impact on your ability to do your job as a journalist, because you report something that maybe is a relatively minor offense, and all of a sudden your access to sources becomes a lot less. So that's really more of an ethical issue, but legally, only in the rarest of circumstances do you have an affirmative obligation to report.
I'm just going to make a comment
Yes,
about the Monte Theo thing. As I listen, and I'm just trying to think this out. We've had a dividing line in this personal opinion, judgment. We've had a dividing line in the last 30 years or so in terms of what's fair game between sports and general entertainment, capital E, thanks to People magazine. I think it's a pejorative. You say it's a People magazine story. People magazine, we had general public interest news magazines in the first half of the 20th century, Life magazine being the biggest. It had a 50-year some reign when it was the essential part of American social life. You had to have life to know what was going on on various aspects of American culture. And that became less important as television took over from print. But People magazine came into business and made it clear that they were interested in human interest stories, whether they pertained to entertainers, politicians, or sports people. And it gradually became aware that famous sports people were subject to the scrutiny the same way as entertainers and politicians. The Manti Te'o story is the classic People magazine story. The only aspect of sports that this really has anything to do with was maybe explaining why he played so poorly in the BCS game. I'm serious, think about it. That's the only aspect that this has to do with sports. Everything has to do with the poor machinations of this confused young man, whether he was a student at Notre Dame or whether he was an athlete at Notre Dame, but he had a certain notoriety, and it was a fascinating voyeuristic story. The only aspect of sports, think about it, was that you could even link to this, why it was important in sports, was why did this guy that was going to be such a great player play so poorly in the BCS game, and how's this going to affect his draft status? Tell me, what else? Nothing else. Everything else, 98% of it was all about voyeurism on all our parts to get this story about this phrase that most of us never heard of. Did you all heard of catfishing until that day? I hadn't heard of it. Sorry, didn't know anything about it. So I'm saying, that's where, and you can blame this all on People magazine. They changed the landscape 30 years ago, and we've never gone back.
So to follow up, Bob, what would you recommend to editors and people at SportsCenter putting the nightly show together. What do we do with this?
You're swept up by these forces. You can't ignore certain things. The big difference between the Penn State story and the Manti Te'o. Manti Te'o is total voyeurism on our part, but the other one is a major social issue, one of the most profound issues of our time, and it shed more light on a topic that most people are only really grasping the severity of than anything that has ever happened in American society. I think it's the most important college story of all time. Going back to the first game between Rutgers and Princeton in 1869, or wherever the first rowing race was between Harvard and Yale, if that's the first sporting event, so be it, in college. Whatever. No more important story, I think, no bigger story than this Penn State story because of the social ramifications of it. And I think more people will become educated to the horror of child abuse and the scars it leaves on victims than anything else that's ever happened in American society. That's why that's such a big story. But I am surprised to hear Ken say that no sports person touched it at the station. I'm not sure what the purpose of that was, but I was just surprised to hear that.
Manti Te'o story, to me, the reason I think it got so much coverage is because the whole college football season, the story was out there about how his grandmother had died and his girlfriend had died on the same day, and it was given so much coverage that, when it came to light that didn't actually happen.
And there's one other factor, and this is once again personal opinion. If this happened at Montana State or Vanderbilt or Fresno State or Boston College, my alma mater, it's an interesting story. It's Notre Dame, and it's Notre Dame, which is the touch point school, the flashpoint, love them or hate them, the biggest name in all of college sports is Notre Dame, and Notre Dame football. Sorry Kentucky basketball, sorry Carolina, sorry Alabama football. Notre Dame has a resonance. They had the movie. You didn't have Ronald Reagan dying, as George Gibb. They did. I'm telling you, it's because it was Notre Dame.
Let's shift gears slightly. Kirk, let's take this, for instance. You've nailed the story. You've got it half written. You're ready to go. And all of a sudden, the phone rings, and the voice at the other end says, "Would you please hold that story?" And you come to find out later that story that you've got an exclusive on has been leaked to other media outlets. What is your reaction to all that?
Oh, I'm real happy. Breaking stories and dealing with sources is all about building relationships. And once you fracture that relationship, a lot of times there's no going back. And this, to me, this happens on a smaller scale, not a daily basis, but very regularly. I remember when Tom Penders was fired, resigning under pressure at Texas back in the 90s, and I talked to my source and said, yes, we're going to have a press conference tomorrow. He's accepted in principle the terms of the severance package and the agreement, but I really wish you wouldn't run that. And I said, why do you not want me to run that? And he said, because you know Tom, and I know Tom, and if it's in the paper in the morning, he might very well renege and change his mind. So I was kind of just stuck in limbo there, and believe me, there was a lot of dirty stuff, leading up to the end of his regime there. So I didn't run the story, and he did resign the next day. But to me, those are the type of issues, we regularly face. I was talking to a coach of a smaller school just 2 weeks ago, and he told me about a scheduling thing with a big power, and he asked me not to run it. And so he was my only source on that. He gave me the information, but then he asked me not to run it. So I told him, I said, all right, well, I won't run it as long as you let me break it before you release it. And it's between them and another school, obviously, and I haven't broken it yet. But every day goes by, it's not a huge story. But these are the types of stories day in, day out that we wrestle with. So, but you never want to, lose sight of your relationship with sources, because you can't ever reveal your sources, and it's very hard to go back once that, that confidentiality has been broken.
And I find that to be true. You have to protect your sources, but I also find it that you usually have your greenest reporters are the ones that absolutely want to protect their sources. And I'd say 50% of the time you get burned by protecting your source. And you have to really weigh the value of what the story is. And like a game schedule is probably not worth losing any sleep.
Right.
But I'd argue a coach getting fired, you got to really wrestle with that one. And that's the kind of stuff that I think you have to be really careful on. We are the Panther station. We got a lot of scoops. We had to be careful that we didn't absolutely just blow them out of the water, because we could have probably done a negative story every third week with something we learned because we were so tight with them. And we had the players coming over for post-game shows at our station and hanging out on Sunday night with us. But you had to weigh what was the story, what was the value, and what was voyeuristic versus what was, legit that was really going on.
Yeah, what about the pressures of being the quote Panthers station? You also then have a ton of advertising dollars that goes with that. Coverage of preseason games, coaches shows, etc. And if you come out blasting the team and the franchise, that money for your station might be in limbo.
We never had a problem with that. Luckily, things were good. I mean, the NFL is printing money. I mean, it is, and the fact that we were this, the station, we got their games. We had a story back in November about Jerry Richardson asking, we knew the figure was between 80 and 90 million. We went with the story that he was shaken down, that's a strong word. Sorry, Jerry. Yeah. Tully, turn that off, please. But we broke that story in November that he was going to ask the city for that money. And, he had every right to ask it. And he got it. But nobody else was reporting that at the time. And that's where we were really walking a fine line, because we were getting inside information from the Panthers, but everybody that was telling us, we had to make sure we had 2 or 3 sources. I mean, we weren't running with that story with, one source either.
Mary Jo, in Lexington, is it tough to tug on Superman's cape if you get a call about something that's happened with the basketball program?
I think it's certainly a unique market. I worked at the NBC affiliate, so we did not have the rights to the basketball games. The CBS affiliate did. So I felt like there was almost more of a lean by my, manager, news director's part to hope that something bad did happen with Kentucky basketball, and we'd be the first ones to say it, because the perception would be that we wouldn't, there would be no fallout for us. I think that we certainly get into wranglings with people over at UK, because there's oftentimes preferential treatment for the station that does carry their games, which I understand, on some level, but being the competitor, it always really stinks to see a one-on-one with John Calipari over there when we had asked 10 times to talk to him and get turned down every time. And he's, of course, treated, in such a, majestic way in Lexington, too, that it's hard to, you have to have John Calipari on your air. That's just how it is. So when another station does and you don't, it really stinks. So I feel like when there are things, I would say we probably this year spent as much time talking about how bad Kentucky basketball was and the sky is falling, where we weren't maybe generating the advertising dollars for special coverage like we did the year before when they won the national championship. But it was almost like my news director's version of a train wreck. And so let's talk about it a lot. And so we did. But I do feel like there's a sense when you're in local competition, the stations that do not have the contracts are oftentimes the ones that really take the lead on more negative stories. At least I felt that way.
Just as a general question to everyone, I think it skews perhaps more toward broadcast than print, but your feelings on endorsements, celebrity endorsements, broadcasters, et cetera, that I'm watching SportsCenter and an anchor is doing a car commercial on a program that he's anchoring. Just general thoughts on whether that's a good thing, bad thing, no opinion. Let's go right down the list.
Yeah, personally, I think in today's world, people understand how celebrity endorsements work. I mean, if you see, someone on TV endorsing a product, you understand that that person's getting paid to do that. So, but typically journalists, the Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics says, you should avoid endorsements because it can undermine your credibility. I think sports journalism, when you have celebrity sports journalists, is a little bit different story, and I think they can get away with it. But I think where you have to stop short is where it can impact what you cover. Like, for instance, what happened with the controversy with Erin Andrews a couple of years ago. I believe she was covering the Rose Bowl game and was noting how some of the players are slipping all over the field with their new Nike cleats. And then a few days later, it comes out that Reebok is using her in a shoe advertising campaign. Yeah. I think that's where it crosses the line. But Dan Patrick selling beers for Red Hook, I think that's probably okay.
Yeah, that was the first time I ever saw it, was Dan. And it's not hard, it's nothing. It didn't bother me, it amused me more than anything else. I know I've had 4 straight Ford Focuses. I wish they'd asked me to do a commercial. I'd be happy to endorse a Ford Focus, but all kidding aside, it's not an issue for print people ever naturally. It's a broadcast issue. It's a celebrity issue of the highest degree. That example is a disturbing one, and that's one. That's not good. That's clearly bad. But I think you're wiser to avoid it. But I can't tell somebody that to turn down a big paycheck if it's really going to be innocuous. But I don't think the Erin Andrews story is innocuous. So you have to draw the line.
Yeah, I adamantly refuse to do endorsements, and I haven't been asked either. So that's been convenient. It's worked out. No, I think you can't be in bed with somebody that you may write about. To me, it's pretty simple as that.
I totally concur. I mean, you can't take cars. You're going to do automotive stories. You're going to do, anything. Erin Andrews is a great example. You can't do airlines deals. I mean, I worked at one station where we took airline deals. Well, how do you cover the first time that airline is found negligent in a flight? You have to be careful in those regards. And we actually have that written into most of our contracts that, nobody can accept anything. In fact, I think the sports guys have the biggest scam that they get fed at the ball games when they're covering it. So, it's what the heck.
It's bad food.
It's not that bad. I've been there.
That's all we ever really want anyway, is the free food. I mean, sports guys, sports girls, free food is really, do we all agree? Like, that's all ever needed. But yes, I agree with all of you guys. It was always in my contract. So it just was never even really a thought for me.
I remember there was one thing, I've worked for about 11 different editors, and a long time ago, I think the mayor was giving all the reporters turkeys for Thanksgiving. This is ages ago, of course, I'm old. And
Was it Thanksgiving then?
It was, for Thanksgiving. And he called and said, is it okay if I give your reporter a turkey? He said, sure, if you can buy my reporter for a turkey, I don't want her on my staff. But I don't take turkeys either.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you this next about the race to be first in this Twitter age. This instantaneous Twitter seemingly has become the new AP wire for the dissemination of sports news, and particularly breaking sports news. And with that, of course, comes the great chance for error in this race to be first. The odds seem to increase. Just your feelings on it from an ethical standpoint, and do the old rules of checking sources and having 2 different sources to confirm a story, do they still hold true in this Twitter age? Mary Jo?
I recently watched Scott Pelley, if you guys know who Scott Pelley is, on CBS News. And he shared a speech. This was after the Boston Marathon bombings. And he quoted someone and said, "Nobody will remember if you're first, but everyone will remember if you're wrong." You probably know who that quote is from. And I think that's so true that Scott Pelley was even talking about, in reference to him giving out wrong and incorrect information the day of the bombings, because they want to be first. Everybody wants to be first. I honestly never remember who has been first for any major story. You don't really remember that. I think it is seen as such a big deal inside your newsroom and your little world. And the people that are watching or reading typically are just going to end up going to where they normally get their news from and see what they have to say about it. I don't think anybody watches television or reads newspapers like our bosses think, no offense, that they sit there the first 5 minutes of the news and switch between the 3 stations, see what they're leading with, how they did it, who's live where. Nobody ever watches the news like that, local news. But that's how our news directors think people at home are watching it sometimes. So that's where I think the race to be first is just such an internal thing and has nothing to do with the external people that are, getting the information from us. I really don't think there's that demand. I do think, Twitter and Facebook, people are on there, but you never even really remember who saw it, who said it on Twitter. You just saw it on Twitter, not who it was. So if it's incorrect information, then you know that that's wrong. Then you go back and look where you heard it and say, oh, that was CBS or that was NBC that said that, and that wasn't right. So that's just, I've never cared to be first. I just want to be right. And I, that's my take on it.
Twitter is a headache for any of us. I mean, it's another element that gives us a more chance to, slip and fall. And it's one of those things, I found you had to set a policy as soon as it came around, because you had to say, this is the same rules. You can't just be tweeting something just because Athlete X tweeted it to you. Don't replay it. Let Athlete X, play that. And in light of what she said, this week, a station in Louisville, Kentucky, the Fox affiliate, decided that they are going to not run breaking news and they're not going to promote breaking news. Well, I wish they'd just shut up about it, because I'm so sick of everybody claiming they have the breaking news and all that stuff. The promos kill us more than anything else. I contend marketing kills us more than our own coverage does. But we have a great marketing department, but it still kills us. But I think that to me just showed that it showed more of the problem in the media, that, oh, we're not going to cover breaking news. We're not going to report it as breaking news. We're just going to cover it as straight news. Well, good. But you just brought up a sore spot that gives us even less credibility than we had before you decided that strategy. So.
I would just say, with all due respect, I want to be first, but I want to be right first.
Yeah.
I want to get that order right. And just a couple of examples of that. I'm sure you know who Julius Randle is.
I do.
He's this 6'10" center from the Dallas area, signed with the University of Kentucky. The University of Texas was actively recruiting him, and I had his cell number, so I was keeping up with him. And I remember it was a Sunday afternoon, so I texted Julius, said it was about a week and a half, I think, before signing day, and asked him, "You any closer to a decision?" And I get this text back within 5 minutes, says, "Yeah, I'm going to Texas." And I said, "When are you going to announce that?" Because I was a little dubious at the time. And he said, "I just did." And I said, "Are you sure you're committing to Texas right now?" And I didn't hear back from him. And so I called one of the Texas assistant coaches who was recruiting him, and he said, "That's news to me. We have not heard from him." And I said, "Well, I'm not going to put this on Twitter until I get it confirmed." He said, "Please don't, because if you put it on Twitter and it's wrong, you're going to kill us with Julius Randle." So I said, "All right, try to call him, because I don't know if it's him or not." So the assistant coach called him and couldn't get him on the phone, and called me back, said he couldn't get him, and he said, it was during spring break too, and he said, "I don't think that's him. I think it's a buddy of his. It was spring break. Maybe he left his phone at home." Right, yeah, that's going to happen. 18-year-old kid not have his phone with him. So I didn't buy that at all. Long story short, not too short, but I didn't run it. I didn't tweet it, and it turned out not to be true. And I found out it was a buddy of his messing around, because they get inundated with texts and phone calls from media, websites, and whatever. So because I'd been in the business a little bit, I wasn't just going to rush to put it on Twitter. As far as the two source thing, I had a story a couple years ago. Mike Sherman was the Texas A&M football coach, and I was able to find out that he was going to be fired. And there were only about 5 people that knew that within Texas A&M administration. Mike Sherman was not one of the 5. And so I told my managing editor, I said, I've got a great source that Mike Sherman's been fired, the decision's been made, and it's going to happen in the morning. And I said, I think we should go with it. I told him who my source was. I always have to reveal my sources to my bosses, sports editor, managing editor. And he said, try to get another source. And I said, I'll try. You know, I couldn't. So for about 15, 20, 25 minutes, we didn't run it. So finally he said, Kirk, you've been working here for years, and we're going to trust your source, and we're going to go with it. So we went with it and put it on Twitter and blogged it, and it was right. And Mike Sherman didn't know yet. And I got a lot of negative emails from Aggies. How could you do this? The coach didn't know yet. And, you know, again, that's not my problem. I want to be sensitive. Mike Sherman's a great guy, and I have a world of respect for him. And that's kind of that whole, you know, Mike doesn't know, and you'd like to be fair to him. You know, Mike didn't give out his cell number, so I couldn't confirm it with him. So, but I ended up running the story anyway with one source. But it was such a good source that it was true. But ordinarily, I would say definitely go for corroboration.
Mary Jo articulated it perfectly as far as I'm concerned. The world that I walked into 45 years ago was a very competitive newspaper world locally with 3 major newspapers, each of which had a morning and evening paper, as well as a number of suburban dailies, which still exist in Boston. It's a highly competitive newspaper situation, even by the standards of the times. And so scoops were important, and you wanted to, it was quite frequent that people wanted to have exclusives, and you worked hard to get them. And but the world was different then. Right up to the time, through the mid-'80s and early '90s, when I was still covering the Boston Celtics, I would get an occasional story, particularly, usually it had to do with Larry Bird, with whom I had a very good relationship. And I could actually, and you'll probably, Kirk will laugh about this, and Mary Jo as well, but imagine the day when I could write the story, say at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, have it, hit the send button, go home, go to bed, go home and go to sleep comfortably, and know that I woke up in the morning and that was going to be the story. That was going to be the scoop. I didn't have to worry about it. Nobody was going to steal it. Well, those days are gone, and now what happens is, and I have to make this clear, if you get a piece of information today, you don't wait for the morning, you have to put it online. You have to tweet it, you have to blog, or blog it, and then you have to put it on the online, and it's on the online. Here's the point, to emphasize what Mary Jo said. Once it's out there, and nobody cares who got it first. It's out there, and everyone starts assessing it and analyzing it. I'm talking about the readers. I'm talking about the other members of the media. It's out there now. What do you do with it? That's what matters, not who got it first. It's gone. That concept is irrelevant, and it just, anybody who doesn't think so is foolish. It's too bad, but you got it first. Too bad. Now it's everybody's, and it's instantaneously everybody's. No more going to bed for 8 hours and waking up and seeing the paper on your doorstep, and you got it first. So that doesn't exist anymore.
Well, as my former journalism professor Chuck Stone always told me, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. So I agree with what Mary Jo said, and what Bob was saying too. I mean, I don't think people really appreciate outside of the newsroom who's first on a story as much, but when somebody is wrong, that's when I notice.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about Twitter, and Bob, you mentioned it, the competitiveness that writers have and broadcasters to be first, to have that story, to have that exclusive. If I can sit back today and say you're covering the Celtics, and I can read your best work or the news bullets on Twitter for free, what's going to cause me to go online? Certainly by the newspaper. You know what I mean? From a journalistic standpoint.
Still, Twitter's 140 characters, so obviously you might, if you're interested at all, you want to know more. But now you've opened up the door to the central issue facing, why newspapers have, are under siege and will never be what they once were. Which is the business idea of how you maintain a newspaper in business-wise and advertising in this new climate. And no newspapers found the solution yet. So that's another matter. But I think in terms of the tweeting thing, once it's out there, you need a little more amplification than 140 characters. But still, it's instantaneous. It's all different. It's different, and that's why it's important to have perspective. You need somebody with perspective to analyze the news, more than ever. Because we're still worried about who got and really, in this insider world, in this I mentioned earlier about the Chris Mortensen and Adam Schefter, both of whom I know and respect, and they do a great job. But the people they're in competition with, they're talking oftentimes about minutes and seconds worth of being first. They all have the same multiple sources anymore. I mean, that's the world they operate in. Now, who cares? Minutes, seconds, who cares? Get it, but then what do you do with this information? That's the important thing.
We're blessed, of course, to have the best of the best in this room, and we'll be honoring our nation's finest. But we'll also have a lot of students here this weekend that want to get into the business of broadcasting, into the business of sports writing. What advice, when it comes to ethics in sports media, if you could give them one piece of advice to take with them after this weekend, what might you tell them?
I'd probably say medical school. I say that, but I joke. I mean, I've been in the business 40 years, and they've been 40 great years. I mean, my wife wakes up every morning, however, and rushes out and makes sure there's not a burning cross in our front yard because a lot of people in Austin like positive news on the Longhorns. But, I would just say it's the greatest field in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anything. And you got to pour your heart and soul into it. And, to me, the whole ethics and integrity thing, there's a right way. And everybody up here, everybody in this room knows what that right way is. And you don't screw sources. You don't compromise your standards. You corroborate stories. I mean, it's the 5 W's and the H's, and that never changes. Hard work trumps everything. And I think it's a great field to go into. And this internet thing, as we all know, it's just a fad. I bet it's, I think it's got a life of another 6 months, tops. What's funny about that, though, is my paper in Austin, the Austin American Statesman, is going to paywall this Tuesday. So, which is, I get a lot of, grief from readers, and then I go, oh, God forbid we charge for our product, because when I go to restaurants in Austin, they usually make me pay. I'm sure Bob doesn't have to pay in New England, but when I go in Austin, I have to pay. So, to me, newspapers were asleep at the wheel. We should have all charged simultaneously 20 years ago. And when all the classified ads went away to eBay, our lives changed forever. And I just, pray to God it's going to, newspapers are going to hold on. There's always going to be a need for writers and people to dispense information, whether it's newspapers, TV, or whatever. And so I'd say writing is one of the best fields you could ever go into.
And I'd love to suggest to them that they learn legal issues because unfortunately the courtroom has become just as critical in many respects, the NFL for example, as what they know about on the field of sports. And sports gets less and less time over the broadcast end. We can't beat ESPN on the local level. We have to go absolutely local. We have to cover high school sports. We have to cover the stuff that the local people want to know about. We would live with the UK. We would live with the Panthers, with the rest of the story with them. But I would suggest that they learn legal news. They would learn financial news because it is a blurred line, and the more they know about the real world, it's not just runs, hits, and errors, first downs, touchdowns, and safeties anymore. It's every aspect of the world.
I think my advice would be to always remember that you are telling a story. And I think we're all storytellers. And I think what's important to remember is anybody can tell you, and you can find out from a million different sources, what the score of the Celtics game was. Now, all the reporters covering it are probably in the same locker room getting the same sound bites from all the players. You can probably get that anywhere. But you want to know what Bob Ryan thinks about it. And he hasn't lost himself, and I think that that's who we all have to tell the story, and through our own eyes, obviously being objective, but I think it's who you are. So don't lose who you are and that you're telling a story, because so much information is out there anywhere, all over the place. You can find out what you want to find out by going to your phone in 5 seconds. But who do you want to hear it from, and how do you want to see that story told? And I think that's what I would encourage you guys to remember, is to be yourself, not lose yourself, and remember that you're telling a story, and you got to want to make people want to listen to you.
I'm going to say that I'm going to assume that anyone who chooses to enter this business, and whether it's broadcasting or print, loves sports, is versed in sports, likes to be around sports, enjoys the games, enjoys people who play the games, who coach the games, likes everything about the idea and aura of sports. It's a very wonderful world to be involved in, as Kirk said, and I'm so glad that I was able to do it. However, you have to remember something. You are a salesperson. You're selling yourself. You're selling yourself to people. You're selling yourself to players. You're selling yourself to coaches and administrators. And particularly with regard to the coaches and administrators, whether they're the athletic directors or general managers, you have to remember one thing. Their interests aren't your interests. They do not, you always have to remember that. And so what's it come down to is this: be skeptical without being overtly cynical. That's the key thing. You have to have your left hand high. You have to be suspicious. You have to understand where they may be coming from without being a complete and utter cynic. I like to feel that I've never become a cynic, and I think it's a very hardest thing to prevent doing when you see so many things that are negative and that you're so frustrating and wrong and contradictory and disingenuous, and you get lied to all the time. Don't take it personally, unless it is, and you'll know when it is. But I hate hearing it. He lied to me. I'll never talk to him again. Oh, stop it. Who are you? You're a writer. He's a general manager. He's a coach. He's not interested in he's interested in protecting his interests. Remember that. They're all interested in one thing, not the right, not the wrong, not your story, not the reader, not their own interest. Fine, deal with that, okay? But that doesn't mean you have to be cynical. There are lots of good people out there, but your job is to be perceived as one of the good guys or good gals yourself. And that's what you got to do. But never let your guard down. But don't always assume that they're always lying, but accept that they're going to lie to you. You have to know that. Thank you.
Rick?
Following up on what Kurt said, I got a little taste of reporting, and then I went to law school. So, but I think the legal profession and the sports journalism profession are similar in that your reputation is important. And when you start out, you need to think about how you're going to be perceived in your profession and by other people, and to do things the right way, knowing that it's going to follow you around for a long time.
Excellent. We have a microphone, Mr. Rice. We do? Okay. And if you all have questions, I do sense from the audience that you're getting a little thirsty, and the beers are on ice, etc. But we did want to open it up for some questions if you had some for this distinguished panel. We have a hand over here. Carl?
I don't need a mic.
What? We couldn't hear you.
I'm concerned about the fact that there's a blurring between opinion and fact. I think the last person that got by with that was Walter Cronkite. We just don't always know whether we're reading the opinion of somebody, and I agree with Mayor Joe. You do need to know a person's opinion, but identify it and not let us think that you're reporting fact just because that's what you think. Is there a reaction to that from the panel?
I've always felt that the important thing is point of view. let's understand one thing. There's no such thing as objectivity. It's only selective subjectivity. Every word you pick is a word that could be replaced only by another word, unless it's an article. Unless it's A, N, or the. Every other word you pick is a choice. Everything you write is a choice. You have a point of view, and it's very difficult. Carl makes a very good point. And it's subtle, though. Often it's very subtle. I mean, I just think in terms of sports writing, where it's less important than in the real world, frankly. That they can be blurred with less harm than it can if you're talking about politics or social issues. I think it's a very important. It's one reason why we do labor in this world much more comfortably than others, writers of other types, because it's so much of it is in fact opinion, and I think you should be able to write with a point of view. Now, over the period of time, you have to establish that it's a valid point of view, and the readers are going to make that judgment on you, and you put yourself out there, and they're going to render the verdict, and you'll know. Believe me, you'll know. So, but I think in sports writing, it's not as it is fuzzy, but I don't think it's as potentially harmful to have a blur here as it is in the rest of journalism.
There was a time when the only commentary or opinion, if you will, came from your sports columnists like Bob or sports broadcasters. You'd have the commentary up there, and everything else was supposed to just be fact. And I think that started creeping in the game stories and everything like that, partly because 3 minutes after the game was over, everybody knew all the stuff that used to be in the game story. Who scored the touchdown, how much time was left, the coach didn't call a timeout. So I think in the sports writing field, I think it crept into some might call it opinion, some might call it edgy or analytical reporting, but I think the immediacy of the news and sports now is kind of forced all writers to, in some way, it shouldn't be opinion, but I think that analysis or something beyond just the reporting of the facts and the scores and the nuts and bolts, it's been a result of, because everybody can get it, as it's happening, not even after it's happening.
I think the nature of our audience, like my audience, the nature of them would be, I hate Louisville, or I hate Kentucky. So they've got their opinions before they even connect with you or watch you or read you. So it's an opinion. Sports is an opinion thing. I love the Yankees. I hate the Yankees. I love the Red Sox. All of the people that are consuming what we say or write already have their opinions. So I think it's more of a sharing of that almost. I don't think most people go into watching a sportscast or reading a sports column without feeling some way about it in the first place. So I think it's almost a sharing of opinions when it comes to sports now, especially with the social media where people can instantly talk back to you and you can have a conversation with them, and Facebook and all that. You can talk with people. So I think if they don't think you have an opinion, or as Bob said, a point of view, I almost think that they don't care what you're talking about as much. If you can't, even if it's just a love of one game, not a certain team, but a love of football or basketball or baseball, that I think that comes out in your writing or in your delivery. So I think we all kind of have opinions when it comes to sports. That's what makes it fun. We have rivalries.
Questions? Yes. We'll get a microphone to you so everyone can hear.
Some of you have referred to official affiliations between teams, colleges, and your stations.
Because they can't hear you back there. They can hear you folks back there.
Where you at? Stand up.
Some of... It's on. Check. All right. Some of you have expressed opinions, and you've talked about official affiliations financially between teams, your institutions. Let's look across the spectrum of how conferences have aligned themselves for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years with millions, billions of dollars. Is there any concern among the panelists, among access, among who gets to cover what now and how it's done because of the financial arrangements?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. One of the issues that we found was just covering bowl games have changed. We don't cover college football at all. We'll cover the bowl games here. And the rules for post-game interviews are so locked down. I know a year ago I went to or a couple years ago I went to the Sugar Bowl, and the rules are unbelievable. And I used to go to the Sugar Bowl ancient times, but when I was doing sports in Montgomery, Alabama, the post-game sound was only for the affiliates and things like that. I couldn't believe how structured it was and how limited it was, that the product only was going to certain stations that were in under the umbrella of the what is now the SEC/ESPN network, but at that time it was just the SEC network. But you weren't allowed cameras, and I don't know if you guys know this, the NFL right now, in Charlotte, we're only allowed 5 cameras on the sidelines for the 5 stations that cover it. I mean, I'm ancient, but I remember back in the days when there were 60 or 70 cameras on the sidelines. Mm-hmm. Now you get 5 cameras on the sidelines, 1 for every affiliate to cover it, and then you just dub the video over it then. But the leagues have wised up, but they have made it tougher for us to cover it and get something unique. That's what I resent as a person putting a product out there. We can't be very exclusive.
Hey, I was just going to say, your eye shot wide open when that question was asked.
I'll give you an example. In Austin, Texas football is rather large. And we spend a lot of energy and manpower covering them. And Mac Brown is still the football coach. Yeah, he is. We get access to Mac Brown Monday mornings for 30 minutes, and that's it for the entire week. We get the head football coach of a gigantic Texas college football program whose budget is $163 million a year. It's the largest in the country. It beats Ohio State by like 20 or 30 million. And we get the head football coach 30 minutes a week. And then we'll get him post-game for about 5 minutes.
$5 million a year. $5 million a year, he gets 30 minutes.
5.4 million, and you think he'd be a little more accountable than that.
How much access does the Longhorn Network get?
How much they want. He actually, that's funny that you asked that, Bob, because he complained last fall that he was having too many demands on his time by the Longhorn Network. He has 3-hour shows in a week, 3-hour-long shows in a week, and we get him 30 minutes. And when we get him those 30 minutes, there may be 50 people at the press conference. So, you don't get him for 22 questions. You may get 5. And I'm pushy as hell, so I make sure I get 5. Because, otherwise, and the stuff you get back from readers like, well, you need to ask Mac Brown that, or why did he do that? He's like, I'd like to know too. And the access has gotten further, constrained.
Let me ask you, what is the reaction from Texas Sports Information on this?
Well, we've got an adversarial role with them too. I'll give you another quick example on that. Last August, the Longhorn football team reported to practice, and they had a deep snapper on their team named Nate Boyer, and he's 31 years old, former Navy SEAL. I was talking to a member of the Sports Information. He was telling me about him. He'd been to Iraq, been to Afghanistan, won a Purple Heart, won a Bronze Star, and he's telling me about it. I said, I've got to interview Nate. I've got to interview him. And he had the gall to say he hadn't even won a spot on the team yet. And I went, I don't give a blankety blank, It's a great human interest story. And so they would never give them to me for access for a great human interest story. And they always complain, you guys only dwell on the negative. You've heard that before. And so they brought him out on Mondays, the same Monday where we get Mac Brown for 30 minutes. They'll bring about 10 players. And that's the only time we get them all week. John knows how that works in Oklahoma. And they brought Nate Boyer the day before 9/11 because it was a manufactured story. And so they brought Nate Boyer, and about 15 of us interviewed him for about, 5 or 6, 7 minutes, and that was it. And so, obviously I wanted him by myself because I was being selfish because it was such a great story. But even if they didn't give it to me, they should have given it to somebody else. It's a great story. Yes, sir.
I had another question about that, but I'm going to say, what happened to the time when sports information directors helped us get the story? Now it appears that all they're trying to do is detract us from getting the story. What happened?
Or they decide what the story is, and then that's the only access you get. Before Kentucky left for Pittsburgh this year to go to the NIT, which was the sky is falling, we got to interview Brian Long and Sam Malone. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of them, because they are two walk-ons who never play. So any of the guys who anybody watching or listening would care about, what they thought about this fate of ending up in the NIT, we never heard from them until after the game was played and they lost, and then, then we could talk to whoever we wanted to because the season was over. But to preview this, I don't even think, honestly, I don't think that we use the sound. I think we use some sound from John Hood, who also you've probably never heard of, but none of those players played. I don't think any of them played in the NIT game either.
Bob, when did that happen? Then you said you were friends with the general manager of the Celtics. And,
I'm listening to all this, and every time the subject turns to the big-time college situation, and I went to 29 Final Fours. I've covered a lot of college in an area where college isn't remotely as important as it is in the world that Mary Jo and Kirk inhabit, or even it is here in Carolinas, the ACC country. So it's a whole different world. I'm always amused, and I always say, thank God I don't have to deal with this every day, because I've dealt with the professional situation. Now that has changed a lot of ways, but I'm just listening to this whole thing with Mac Brown, and I'm thinking, well, if you cover the Boston Celtics and you're one of the beat people, or you're one of the regular TV people or radio people that might be going, and you have people who work, for example, for we have all kinds of people who have full-time assignment coverage. Every day they're not playing, they have practice, and after practice, the coach is available every day. Not once in a while, not selectively, not Monday morning at 9 o'clock, every day. Doc Rivers is available. The players are available, except for maybe Kevin Garnett. He's imperial when you have to deal with that. But for the most part, everybody else is successful. No, yeah, I'm not. It's true. And he's an exception. But everybody else is available. And Doc is always available. I mean, I'm just looking at this going, once again, thank you for putting me in my world rather than in their world. I don't envy them what they go through. No, but in these big-time college world, these coaches are omnipotent, they're overpaid, and they're power crazy, and they are allowed to do whatever they want, and the ADs don't have control, and there's nobody that cares. Certainly not about print people, or apparently about local television people either. So, if ESPN strolls in, they might, that may be different. So I understand that. So that's where they are, and we don't have that at Boston College. We don't have that. They're rather happy to have the attention. They're competing with 4 major professional teams every day, so that's a little different.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say I'm a first timer, and this is great. I just came here to drink and to learn. I didn't know I was going to learn anything.
You're going to be the president of this group.
But the toughest, I tell you, I'm a reporter, I'm a beat reporter, and the toughest thing for me, and I'd like you guys' opinion, is, whether to kiss ass and get, with the team I cover and get information, or to, more tell it like it is and expose the warts and risk not getting information. And I am in the business of trying to get news first. And so I just wonder what you guys, how you handle those kind of things.
I think I've seen plenty of people kiss ass and it not get them any further than if they didn't.
I think you got to look at what are you print?
Yeah.
What do your readers want? I mean, what's more interesting? And I think you really have to look at that. I'm going to slightly jump on what Bob said a few minutes ago, but have you ever seen the movie Almost Famous? Watch it. Watch it. It's really good, but it's about a guy that got to write for the Rolling Stone when he was like 15 years old. Yeah. Well, at the end, he learned that you can kiss ass all you want, but you're not going to get the story. And it's a little hypey, but to me, that is the ultimate story that tells you what you really need to know. To me, it's better than Watergate. Better than the Watergate movie.
I don't kiss ass. So I don't look good in lipstick. What I tell them is that.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
The relationships that you got to have
Right.
with guys,
Right.
with people.
And it's easier being older than dirt, I promise you, because they know I'm around, they know I'm, and that's what I don't get with them, is like the Nate Boyer story. What was going to be negative about that? And, we're going to reach, the newspaper's going to reach 100,000 plus if I write a positive story about this kid. He went on and won several awards last year. It was a great story, but, they wouldn't let me sit down with him. Now, he was on the Longhorn Network. They get very territorial, and they want to keep it for themselves. And that's part of the problem. But, I'm just going to be as tough as I have to be, but I want to write good stories. Readers want good stories. The only time I get popular in Austin is when the team sucks and they want to know why, and they want me to be harder on them. So.
It's a daily balancing.
Go ahead, Bob.
It's a daily balancing act, I learned.
Now, once again, the difference between my basic formative years and my preponderance of my experience was covering professional sports. And the dynamics of the college thing is a very, very different matter, or high school for that matter. With how you report games and how far you go. I know there are people that don't report who fumbled and who struck out, and they just say it happened. And I find that ridiculous, but I guess in some markets you have to do that. I don't know, but in my case, I was trying to learn. My biggest conflict came when the coach who thought that he had nurtured me, namely Tom Heinsohn, learned that I was forming my own opinions a lot of times based on what I was learning from the players. And when that came into conflict, that's when my trouble started covering the Boston Celtics about my third year in. And when that conflict began, and it went on for 4 years before I finally got off the beat for the first of 3 times. So, that was that. But it's a daily balancing act. You learn things and the things about players and personal stuff that is, you got a table. At least I think you do. And there's other stuff that maybe, you table it for a while and then bring it out. You learn this. It's all trial and error. But once again, I'm telling you, I think it's much easier to do it at a professional level than it is to do it on either. And the high school's the worst of all. All you guys out there, I'm sure there's any number of people here who would say that the worst thing in the world is writing a story. My favorite high school story, this happens to all of us. You write a story about a high school team or a player, and you immediately get the phone call from either somebody on the other side. Well, my son works hard too. Well, yes, I will certainly concede that, but I wasn't writing about him or her. But that's why that's another matter. Though I never, that's the hardest world of all to operate in. And colleges, NBA, the pros are easier by contrast. I'm telling you.
Yeah, for the sports writers on the panel, I'm a sports columnist and I host a radio show. There's 2 different missions there. The radio show wants you to endorse products and, car dealerships and sports bars. I feel a little funny about that sometimes because I was raised in print journalism. How do you deal with the ethics of that?
I think you should give that all your gifts that you're unhappy with to us panelists here tonight. No, I think you should be looking at those and measure them. What are the ones that you have the potential conflict with? And, if that's sort of if that's...
I don't cover car dealerships.
But if that's the way that the company is sort of paying you rather than just pure cash, I think you should look at it, and I'd look at what are the ethical considerations that where are you going to cross lines, and where are you going to possibly have to do a commentary on it. No offense, I don't know whether Erin Andrews ever thought she was going to be reporting on a shoe line, and I'm not trying to defend her as much as I'm just saying she may never have considered that until all hell broke loose when that controversy came up. And I think that's something you just have to measure and say, where can I, walk the fine line here?
I did a radio show for 2 years in Austin, Mike, and they wouldn't let me do any endorsements, and the partner I was on, who worked for the radio station, loved it because he got all the revenue for that. But just another example, we have a great outdoors writer named Mike Leggett. He's one of the best in the country. He's won awards for his writing. He's just a super guy. And there was talk about Academy sponsoring, a page, the outdoors page, like every Thursday or Sunday. The back page would be all him. And we eventually didn't do it. And, I wasn't sure how I felt about that because I didn't know if he would ever have to write something about Academy selling, unlicensed guns or something like that. And I think, like Ken was saying, you don't know when you're going to cross the line. So, if you feel like you're compromising yourself, I would err on the side of caution. But I think, my newspaper made the decision for me, and I was fine with that. Bob's probably into that more.
I can plead ignorance only because I've never had a full-time radio show myself or officially co-hosted one more than, I don't know, very seldom. I've been countless panelists on a show many times and for regular times, but not, so I've never been in that situation, thank God. I don't have that, I never had that problem.
This question is for all of you. I'm curious about how you've gone about or still go about gaining trust of athletes in these days of limited access, increasing distrust of the media, and even in local markets, where they may or may not even watch you. For me, I'm in broadcast, may not watch you on television. How do you go about gaining the trust of these guys in order to get the good stories and the scoops?
This is interesting because in my case, it's so long ago that I stopped, the last time I was on a beat was 87, 88, became a columnist in 89, and until I officially retired last summer. And for the last 20 years, I was living off, I lived off who I was in that market, and then on top of which, thanks to TV, thanks to ESPN exposure, that changed my world. I'll never forget the first time a player introduced himself to me. It was a very startling experience, and that was at 1991 ALCS, when a guy walked up to me as I was going from the clubhouse to a field on an off-day workout with the Twins and the Blue Jays, and the A's, and there was a guy who introduced himself. It was Gene Larkin. Gene Larkin wound up driving the winning run in the 1991 World Series, and that was startling revelation. Never happened before. And after a while, that became the norm. They know who you were because of TV, but I had a local, reputation. Well, I worked very hard to cultivate, but I don't know. But I'm going to get it. I don't know how you do it now. I don't know how you do it now. I don't. I'm one of the many reasons I'm glad I did it when I did it, at the time I did it, where I did it, et cetera, et cetera. I do not have the answer to you. I do not know what it would be like. I don't envy the contemporary young reporter trying to establish himself or herself with the limited access. We had access that they would cry for today. Cry for. They would not imagine the circumstance under which we covered teams then, before charter flights, and when practices were totally open, and you were welcome in the locker room for an hour before practice just to sit around and shoot the breeze with no notebooks, and you knew their wives' names and their kids' names and their brother's name and everything about them, and that world doesn't exist anymore. That's the world I was formed in. I don't know what you do now. I have no idea.
Well, a lot of that goes back to the access problem. We don't get to know them, they don't get to know us as people. And the other thing, when we have our gatherings on Monday, when they bring these football players in, the sports information, they reproduce like every 5 minutes. There are like 30 of them, and they bring them into the room, and they put Longhorn shirts on them for TV, and they coach them up. Yeah. They tell them, team first. Be careful what you say. Don't disparage the other team. You're representing yourself, your parents, your mom, your Aunt Lucy, and everything. And these people are not your friends, which we're not. We're not their friends, but we don't have to be the enemy either. They coach the personality out of them. And you would like to think a couple of them might read a story now and then, and maybe determine for themselves whether we're Satan or not. And I don't know if any of them do that or not. I'll give you one quick example. It's partly the dangers of Twitter we were talking about. Last year's Texas-Oklahoma game, a lot of times what I do is I go down and get quotes, come back up, put a few things on Twitter, and then start writing my column. Well, I was in a rush, which you should never do on Twitter, and Kenny Vaccaro was their safety, first-round pick of the New Orleans Saints, and I had the misfortune of typing that Kenny Vaccaro said Oklahoma ran the balls down our throat, which was not a good thing to write, okay? A friend of mine came over and said, hey, I think you had a typo in your... So I indeed had a typo. So I changed it immediately. He said, sorry. He said, Oklahoma ran the ball down our throats. Okay. Anyway, Kenny Vaccaro tweeted really quick saying, don't ever ask me another question, something like that, and kind of went off. And I understand because he was hurting. They lost like they usually do to Oklahoma. And that's another story. So anyway, to finish the story, I emailed the SID for Texas, apologized, said it was totally my fault, inexcusable, and hope you'll let me apologize to Kenny on Monday, which I did. And to me that goes back to building relationships one-on-one, but if you don't get that one-on-one, you're not going to. So I found I develop more relationships with Longhorn athletes after they leave, when they can judge for themselves.
But I found that too, certainly when they come back. Now you can open up with them more.
Not shielded.
Yeah, I do think though that they watch. Maybe not all the time. They're not tuning in every single night at 6. But I do think they watch, and other people watch for them and tell them if they don't see it. So I think they're well aware of who people are when they're interviewing them. Now, I mean, there's a lot. It's hard to know everybody, but the people that are there on a daily basis, you're there every Monday. We're there every single Monday and game and all that. They know who you are. I do, but they've been, like you said, they've been coached so much that the rare time that they ever actually have their own opinion and say something. I remember after the NIT loss to Kentucky, some of the guys were really angry, and Archie Goodwin was one of the freshman guards, and I asked him, now this is over, what's your thoughts on the NBA? He looked at me and said, I would never leave for the NBA, and spouts off, nobody's leaving, nobody's going, and of course he's the only one that ended up leaving, besides Nerlens Noel, but it was the one time that he said what I felt was an uncoached answer. And everybody got a written press release about 15 minutes later that we are exploring our options and we'll see what happens, and so we all got that. So it's really hard. It's the luck of the draw a lot of times. I mean, there's some kids that have covered in high school that have ended up playing for the college team or for UK or something. So if I've known them for a long time, then they know. I feel like you have that relationship there, and they will be open with you. But that doesn't always happen, obviously.
Let me just ask you a quick follow-up, Kirk and Mary Jo, about when's the last time you had the chance to sit down with an athlete at Texas or Kentucky and not have somebody from the sports information department in the room with you? Does that happen? Do you have freedom to cultivate a relationship, or is that SID person there all the time?
I remember when Earl Campbell won the Heisman Trophy in 1977.
Black and white.
I spent a whole day with him.
I could go sit down right now with anyone on the track team, anyone on the softball team or baseball team, swimmers.
Right.
Doesn't matter if they play football or basketball, no.
It's a non-revenue sport.
Yeah, and a perfect example, even here in Charlotte, we can sit down with every Panther after the game, and whatever ones don't go hide in the in the medical room, except for Cam, and Cam is completely coached, and we never get a question with Cam without his people around him.
Any other questions? Yes.
Rathbun, this one's for you, actually. There are several of us in this room that might work a little bit more directly with a team. Say, in my case, I work for the school directly that I cover. How do you offer advice to not only people like us, but some of the younger folks in the room about how to deal with the difficulty of your listeners and viewers wanting to know the absolute truth from what they feel like can be an absolute source, but also having to protect your brand at the same time?
David, I think it is one of the biggest challenges that a lot of us have in the play-by-play field because we love our jobs and we want to keep our jobs. And ownership, management of the team, more maybe at the pro level, but certainly at the college level too, they think that you have to paint a picture in a certain way. We know that's not true, but they have the power to hire and fire you. So you have to serve your master and at the same time try to build that credibility with your audience to be able to tell a factual story. And I don't know that there's any other side of the business where our jobs are dependent on that. We don't have free reign. You know, I see Brad, you know, and he could certainly give a comment on this with what he's going through in Dallas.
I'm glad you asked because this will be 35 years.
Yeah. Here we go.
This will be 35 years for me doing the Dallas Cowboys, and I have never ever once had anyone, 3 different ownerships, tell me what to say or not to say. Clearly, if you are in that job, Bob Beeler knows what not to say about the coaches at Boise while he's doing a Boise game. You don't say, what an idiot move that was. But you absolutely can be critical. I don't think you can get personal. You can absolutely be critical of what happens in the game because those same owners and administrators are, if you're fair, this is just my experience, if you're fair and tell the truth. Now, there were a lot of times when I was doing a talk show during the week, that's a trickier rope to walk because what you say in candor on Thursday night, someone may hold against you on Sunday. Just in terms of doing games, I only once in my life have I had someone say you can't do that. I had just started working in Dallas and I was doing SMU basketball. Sonny Allen was the newly hired coach. And a fellow named Dick Davis, God rest his soul, was the new athletic director. And they went and played I just started. They went and played UCLA, had Marcus Washington and Kiki Bandaway was a freshman, and they got beat by 35 points, school record. And in the course of that game, I said SMU doesn't belong on the floor with UCLA. 2 nights later, they were playing in Tucson, playing Arizona with Big Bird Elliott and Herm Gilliam. And in between, Dick Davis called me in and he said, you can't say that. You can't say that we don't belong on the floor and we're trying to build a program. I said, Dick, I didn't say they were bad kids. I didn't say they weren't trying. I just said they didn't belong on the floor with them. Well, you can't say that. Okay. So I found a different way to say it when they lost by 40 to Arizona 2 nights later. But I don't think you really have a problem telling the truth about what's happening in a game. And I do think that after you've done it for a while, I listened to Eric Nadel do Texas Ranger games. He's been doing the Rangers as long as I've been doing the Cowboys. He's one of the best in the country. And he's seen some of the worst baseball since Abner Doubleday over the course of his years. And I heard him the other night say a young player made a mistake at bat, swinging at a pitch that he had no business swinging at, and Eric said, well, you just can't do that. Well, you can say that. You can absolutely say that. it's everyone knows that's bad baseball. Just say that. You didn't say he was a bad guy. You didn't say he was stupid. You said that you can't swing at that pitch. It's true. And I don't think you get in trouble for that most times.
And I do hear you, Brad. I'll just give you a quick example from the NBA. It's an analyst side. We know what the Guokas family has meant to the National Basketball Association. Matty Guokas just got fired doing the color on the Orlando Magic telecasts because he was too honest. And new management that they have in place did not appreciate it. I think they used age as a crutch, and out the door he goes. And he's as fair, would you say, Bob? He's as fair an analyst in the NBA as we have. And so, you know, I feel the tug in Atlanta with our owners. I mean, they think you're supposed to be a cheerleader that's going to sell tickets and improve ratings. And God bless them for that. But we all know when you're winning 13 games out of 82, it can be a little tough. But it is a constant tug, I think, that we face on the TV side now that hasn't been there. If you line up a critical play in the NBA, and David Stern comments on this all the time, says, I listen to the Phoenix broadcast, and they clearly say it's a block, and I listen to the Celtics broadcast, and Tommy Heinsohn says it's a charge. Now, how can you two guys be so far off? Because of the prism we're asked to view the game from. But it's one of those things that tugs at me. Because I grew up here with this organization. I learned at the hand of Marty Brenneman. And he is one guy who has always told it like it is. And because I was 12 years old when I started, I figured, well, that's how you do it. And there's no judgment. This is how it's done. And that part of it has always bothered me. Yeah, we're there to promote your team and broadcast the games and get excited, and et cetera. But we also have to have a little bit of integrity for our audience. So a long-winded answer, David, but that's some of the pressures we feel. Tell us your Des Bryant story.
You remember your comment about Des Bryant?
Last fall when...
Try not to remember it after I've said it.
He wasn't having a Hall of Fame game, needless to say.
Oh, this is on the punt return.
Right.
I said you got to get him out of there.
I was curious if you had any...
No, they got him out of there.
No. I agree with your comment. I don't know if Jerry or anybody ever says anything. Nothing.
Nobody said anything. The coaches agree. They were giving him a lot of rope.
Right.
And he fumbled another punt. And I said, well, you just got to get him out of there. You got to have someone else do that job.
I think listeners and viewers have a BS meter too. And if your baseball team only wins 40 games and you're completely positive the whole way through, they're going to stop listening to you because it's not realistic. You're not giving them what they want. So I think if you are totally, rah-rah for the team and they're not doing well, nobody will listen to you doing that because it doesn't make sense.
Got one more right here?
Yes. We grew up in a society where the principle always was, you are innocent until you are proven guilty. Nowadays, it's you're innocent until you're proven guilty, or ESPN or somebody runs a story that says you're guilty. What about the responsibility that we have that once that word is out there in the minds of a lot of people, the person that we're reporting on is going to be guilty forever, whether they're actually proven that or not?
Why don't you start us off?
Is the first name that comes to my mind. And contextually, it was right after all of the Jerry Sandusky stuff first came out, and I was guilty of it. The Associated Press had a story, so I report, citing the AP, but I don't remember, this does not, reflect well on me, but honestly, I don't remember running a story that said Bernie Fine didn't do this, or, we have, this story was reported. I think a lot of us are probably guilty of that sometimes. I know I've been, certainly in that situation.
I think you as a journalist can't control how someone else may perceive a news story. I think if it's a story about an athlete that's been charged with a criminal offense that could affect his or her eligibility or ability to play the game, then yeah, I think it's a legitimate news story. But you have to be careful, of course, to walk that fine line of making sure that you're reporting allegations and not crossing the line of, of getting into libel. And then you definitely have to worry about that. And I think how it's perceived, maybe you don't cover it, wall to wall like we see sometimes going on, but I think it's a legitimate story, and I think it can be reported. You just have to report it the right way.
I don't know what to add to it. I mean, I'm not sure what specific you have in mind necessarily that I'm trying to think, that there's that. I mean, it's just a general, whether it's sports or anything. I mean, what's the greatest one? I'm just thinking about the horrible rushes to judgment that we know in our time. Probably the bombing story at the Olympics in Atlanta would spring to mind as number one, and the circus atmosphere that surrounded that. I've forgotten the innocent guy's name, but we know. Yeah. Oh yeah, but we now know who the guilty person was. But yeah, I mean that's an example. But that's. What
about steroid lists?
That's another corollary to me. It's not now we enter the topic. Oh my God, this is like it's midnight and oh my God, where do we go? That's such an open-ended story. The whole steroid thing. The problem with the steroid thing, and I'll sum it in my mind, is simply this: is that we do in fact make judgments based on things other than facts, but on suppositions and eye tests. And I mean, just to take it for example, Hall of Fame voting. Why don't people vote for Bagwell? Why would someone not vote for Mike Piazza? Other than just two reasons why you wouldn't vote for Mike Piazza this time. One, you're one of these absolute Neanderthal idiots that won't vote for somebody the first year just because. There's a few of them left. They keep people from being unanimous votes. The other reason is he doesn't pass the eye test. In your mind, what you now perceive to be the eye test for the profile of a steroid user. He fits the profile of a steroid user in the eyes of some people. He's never been directly linked. This isn't Bonds, this isn't Clemens, this isn't Palmero, this isn't Sammy Sosa, yo no habla inglés. No. This is a strictly eye test. Same with Bagwell. You only hit 6 home runs in Bristol. How come he hit 440 and he got bigger? It's eye test. That's a whole other matter. I mean, I'm rambling now, but I mean, so the steroids thing, that's the problem with steroids is in terms of baseball. I mean, there's other aspects of steroids, of course.
This has been wonderful.
Thank you to my panelists. Outstanding job, everyone. Thank you. Hope you all enjoyed it. David.